What is up, everybody? Allow me to introduce myself. I am Aisha Frazier. I'm a senior multimedia journalism student at North Carolina A&T, and I'm Black. I'm queer identifying. I use she, they pronouns, and ultimately I'm fat, right? And that's what we're here to discuss today for this special podcast episode. I want to outline fatness and fatphobia as a diversity issue, break it down, and tell you a bit about my personal experience having a larger body in this world. I feel like oftentimes when we discuss issues of diversity, we touch on large topics like race, gender, sexuality, religion, and more, but rarely do I enter into discussions about fat phobia and body stigma unless I'm the person to bring it up or I actively sought it out within the community. I feel like there's so much more that A&T could be doing in this world, honestly, to support and accept that bigger bodies are regular bodies and they deserve respect, love, and inclusion, right? So to begin, I want to break down the definition of fatphobia for folks who don't know what it is, as outlined by the Boston Medical Center. It's a noun and it states, fatphobia, also known as anti-fat, is the implicit and explicit bias of overweight individuals that is rooted in a sense of blame and presumed moral failing. Being overweight and or fat is highly stigmatized in Western culture. That's the beginning of that definition, but I want to break that beginning part down, okay? Fatphobia can literally be translated to a fear of fatness, right? That phobia and that fat. But expressed here, it's defined as against or like an anti-fatness, right? The implicit part is referring to, for example, it's when chairs on buses aren't big enough for fat bodies, or clothes aren't offered in large enough sizes, or desks at campus or on campus are too small to sit in them, right? It's not something that's explicitly fatphobic, but it's implicit, right? It's sometimes you don't know that you're doing it or that you don't know that it's fatphobic, but it is. It's rooted in fatphobia. The explicit is kind of referring to that very public or knowingly like fat shaming people, discrimination or harming to fat people. The fat being highly stigmatized in Western culture is simply stating the body stigma that is deeply ingrained and rooted in Western society. There's this assumption that folks with bigger bodies are healthy or unhealthy, or abnormal, when that is false. The second part of the definition, I'm going to continue. It says anti-fatness is intrinsically linked to anti-Blackness, racism, classism, misogyny, and many other systems of oppression, meaning that fatness is linked to and affects almost all other systems of oppression. And it can have racial implications as well. Okay? So with all that breakdown from my perspective, now let's read it all together, now having that context. Again, so fatphobia, also known as anti-fat, is the implicit and explicit bias of overweight individuals that is rooted in a sense of blame and presumed moral failing. Being overweight and or fat is highly stigmatized in Western culture. Anti-fatness is intrinsically linked to anti-Blackness, racism, classism, misogyny, and many other systems of oppression. That is a lot to unpack. But ultimately, fatphobia affects people every single day. We live in a world where a person who looks like me or is fat and takes up space like me will have it 10 times harder due to reasons that ultimately they can't change. See, I've been fat my whole life. I've been dealing with the effects of body stigma my entire life. I had to shop for clothes, right, in the women's section in elementary and middle school. So I looked older in age, which added to a hypersexualization of my body by men and figures in my life. Right? Whenever I go to the doctor, medical professionals immediately talk to me about dieting or make assumptions about my health because of my weight. I am often seen as the more unattractive or less dateable, quote unquote, friend because of my body. And I could keep going on because everything from fashion, healthcare, matriculation through school, employment, and more is affected by fatphobia. It is an issue and it needs to be addressed by more than just fat people. Like, I'm tired of being like, see me, hear me, and not being taken seriously. And that's the key part. Kelsey Ionani is a fat researcher, and her research article titled, "Where Do I Fit? A Checkup on the Role of the Fat Researcher in Healthcare Spaces," she says, "As a fat woman, I am both hyper visible and hyper invisible. and the hypervisibility of my fatness is inescapable. From my perspective, I closely relate to the part that says my fatness, quote, is inescapable. I feel like the first thing people see when they meet me is my race. Then they see my fat body. Next, they assume my gender, and then later they learn of my sexuality, and it happens in that order. I cannot escape or hide my fatness, but at the same time, I feel like I'm also forgotten about a lot of the time. I'm silenced or made to feel invisible, right? I'm from the South where the men, right, quote unquote, hold doors for women. And while I don't believe in gender roles and such things like that, it still deeply hurts my feelings when men will hold the door for my friends and then literally let it close in my face. Basically saying that I'm invisible. So that hyper visible, so you're big, so you're hyper visible, but you're hyper invisible at the same time from something that you can't escape. It's inescapable, right? But, excuse me, fat phobia is more than just hurt feelings. Right? Iohani explores and unpacks and researches their experiences with healthcare professionals and shows how fatness also acts as a barrier to accessing quality healthcare. Similar to the way that Black women are mistreated and gaslit in medical spaces more often than that of women of other races, growing up and experiencing the effects of body stigma can take a major toll on one's mental health, right? I am a fat Black, queer person, right? All of those things have direct effects on my mental health. See, Brianne Foz examines this. She examines training and promotion of fat affirmative psychotherapy to provide supportive space for healing from the effects of fat phobia and stigmatization of fat bodies. In her research article, Fat and Furious, Interrogating Fat Phobia and Nurturing Resistance in Medical Framings of Fat Bodies. So the same way that Black folk, right, LGBT members and folks who've experienced discrimination as a whole, years of racism, misogynoir, homophobia, the same way that they need and deserve restorative therapies, so do fat people. Folks who are recovering from trigger warning, a history of disordered eating as a result of Western society's deeply ingrained body stigma deserve therapy, deserve restorative therapy because the effects of fat phobia run so deep. Even though we have figures like Lizzo that kind of rose to fame, right, and are publicly body positive, even her representation in media is worth further examination, right? She's oftentimes bullied. She represents one thing, but a lot of times she's seen dieting and doing things like that are forms of internalized fat phobia. See, while her new shapewear line, Yitty, it's rooted in body inclusivity, right? And it goes from sizes 6X to XS. And it's very important that she tried to radically change the way sizes are displayed. So it's displayed with the larger sizes first, which that's a major thing. And everybody had huge expectations when it came to this line. But the publicity of it and how they kind of advertise it is the same way that other shapewear lines do, right? It's supposed to be rooted in body inclusivity, but it still falls short. And it's not the kind of like transformative fashion and media representation that fat bodies always need. So don't get me wrong, I love Lizzo. But even she, like a lot of folks, including myself, who have felt the effects of kind of body stigma, have a lot of unlearning to do. We all have a lot of unlearning to do and internalized fat phobia to release, and the change is needed. The issue is there. The research, the key part is that the research is there to support this, right? But it starts with schools, teachers, and institutions like A&T making space for fat people to discuss their own personal experiences. It takes reshaping and unlearning how we view and how people shame fat bodies within our society. It also takes, right, medical professionals listening to the research, right, about the falseness of the BMI scale, restructuring their work and adequately training their doctors and nurses and assistants about how fat phobia affects healthcare. Those are some of the major parts of it, but that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? After unpacking and letting you know all of that, I'm gonna leave it there for a second. That was a lot. All that information I just broke down to you, that was a lot. So I'm gonna leave it there for now, the tip of the iceberg, right? But I want to leave you with this excerpt from Sonia Renee Taylor's The Body is Not an Apology, right? It's her book. And in this quote says, moving from body shame to radical self-love is a road of inquiry and insight. We will need to ask ourselves tough questions from a place of grace and grounding. The road to recovering from and dismantling body stigma starts with the individual practicing radical self-love, right? And this is just my breakdown of it. It starts with us practicing radical self-love and really introspectively kind of getting to the roots of themselves and their personal relationship with their bodies. That's where it starts. The road to recovery and the road to dismantling the stigma starts with that, practicing radical self-love. And that's where I'm going to leave it for today. Once again, I am Aisha Frazier, and I want to thank y'all for listening to this rant. And until next time, make sure you're being kind to yourself and kind to your fat body, because this is not the last time that you're going to hear me rant about this topic. But for now, I'm going to repeat that one more time. Be kind to yourself and to your body. Thank y'all so much for listening, and have a good day, okay?